Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name's Alisha and today I'm doing my May monthly wrap-up. I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in May, and I honestly had such a great reading month. I read so many great books and I honestly don't think I had any book less than 4 stars. I want to say there was one, but other than that it was a great month of reading. And yeah, I'm going to talk about how I felt about these books and let's get into it. So the first book I read was a reread, and that was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This, of course, is a beloved booktube favorite, and this is the second time I'm reading this book, and I loved it just as much as I did the first time reading it. I think I always like when you read a really good book for the first time, I feel like there's like this kind of sadness that comes with it, because you're like I'm never going to be able to read it for the first time again. And like those feelings you get from reading a book for the first time is just, you know, something different. So I feel like it was a little bit of the magic was maybe gone when I read this book, but it's still a 5-star read. I absolutely loved it. I love all my 6 babies, you know, Kaz, Inej, Jesper, Wylan, Nina, Matthias, the whole storyline, the plot, the romances, everything about this book was just impeccable, you know, chef's kiss. So absolutely loved it and loved it a second time, and I'm sure honestly this is the type of book that I could read over and over and over again and just love it the same every time. The next book that I read, which was one that I have been needing to get to for so long, was the sequel to Six of Crows, Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. So I actually read Six of Crows last year for the first time, and I kind of was holding off reading the sequel because I didn't want, you know, this world to end and to like let go of these characters and all of that. So I finally picked up this book, and it was such a lovely and like great like wrap up to the whole sequel, or to the whole series. I think this one was more, I think, kind of an ode to the characters and to this world rather than maybe the actual plot. Like I was thinking while reading it that like, did we really need this book, you know, in terms of like what was going on with the plot? It did feel a little all over the place, I want to say, but obviously because of the characters, this book was just amazing. I think everyone who's, you know, read these books and loved these characters as much as, you know, I do, knows the Kaz and Inej moments, and that one moment in this book that just was so rewarding and so nice and so good. And I love the ending. I feel like it was a pretty open ending, which I actually really like in books, because I feel, you know, when the author writes exactly what the future looks like in books, it kind of obviously closes the ending and like we know this is how it's gonna be. Whereas when it's a bit of an open ending, we can imagine and we can always hope for maybe, you know, down the line the author might go into the world again. So yeah, I was really actually happy with the way it ended, and of course all the moments, all the character moments, loved it. This was, I would say, I was between a 4 and a 5 with this one, so I think I gave it a 4.5 in the end. Again, only because like some parts with the plot and like a couple other things I was like, got a little boring, and didn't really care for it, but because of the characters, because of the world, so good. So the next book that I read was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. So this is a really popular book just in general, I feel, and of course Matt Haig is a beloved author. He wrote The Humans, which I haven't read, but I hear is a great book, and I really enjoyed this book. I think the premise of it was really interesting. It's basically about this woman who's kind of on the verge of ending her life, and she ends up doing suicide, so trigger warnings for that. But when she does suicide, she ends up in this place called the Midnight Library, which is basically a library filled with books of kind of every decision she did in her life, what would have happened if she had done or like chosen the other thing, if that makes sense. So we basically in the book go through like different scenarios of her life had she, you know, chosen A instead of B. And so the whole thing was really interesting, and like I feel like it was a really reflective read, because it kind of makes like, it made me think of like, oh, like, you know, something maybe super small, a decision that was super small or maybe in the moment didn't feel like a big deal, how that could change your life and how that kind of sets you on the like the path that you end up being on. And yeah, like just how that could change based on one decision. So I really like this book. I did think just because, again, because of that premise of like we're just going into different kind of scenarios of her life, it did just a little bit get repetitive. And so I wouldn't say I was like bored, but it was just a little repetitive, I guess. So I give this book 4 stars, but it was a really beautiful read, beautiful writing, and I would highly recommend this book to honestly everybody. So the next book that I read was These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is a book that I was kind of really anticipating because I've heard a lot of great things, and I know Chloe Gong, the author, is super young. I think she's 22 or something, so that's around my age. So whenever I see something like that, I'm like, damn, you know, she's my age and she is a published author. What am I doing with my life? But aside from that, the book itself I really enjoyed. I think so this is a Romeo and Juliet kind of inspired, I wouldn't say retelling, it's more of just an inspired book from Romeo and Juliet, and it's set in 1920 Shanghai. So it's about these two kind of warring cults, I guess, or not cults. It's about these two warring gangs who are, one of them is like from Shanghai and another one's Russian, and so they're of course against each other. They're trying to take control of the city, and in the midst of that there's also what it seems to be a monster on the loose, and so there's this whole mystery involved. And I also, like a lot of people, I didn't go into it thinking that it was just a full-on romance, because a lot of people that I had seen reviews of were talking about how even though it's a Romeo and Juliet inspired book, it's not really heavy in romance. And I honestly didn't mind that. I think romance as a subplot in books is usually what I like more than like the main thing. And so I think in this book, having obviously the fantasy aspect, the mystery aspect, and even like the kind of political intrigue and like strategy sort of that they were doing with the gangs and stuff, I thought all of that was really cool. And I did like the romance. It wasn't that it was bad or anything. I just feel like it was, I don't know if it was maybe like lack of chemistry, or I didn't really like fall in love with the characters too much. So maybe like something was just off about it. I think I gave this book 4 stars in the end, but I did really enjoy it. I had a fun time reading it. I think like in a way it kind of put me in a reading slump, only because it was like took a while for me to get through this. Like usually I read physically pretty fast, but this one kind of took a little while. But it wasn't that the book was bad, it's just a couple parts of it I was a little off about, I guess. So the next book that I read was Harrow the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is the sequel to Gideon the Ninth, which I read I think last month or the month before, and usually I like try to kind of hold off reading a sequel if I really loved it, and like there's like, if I really like, there's like a tier above that. If I really love the book so much that I'm like, okay, I cannot wait to read the sequel, I have to read it right away, which is kind of what happened with this book, or with Gideon the Ninth technically. I absolutely love that book. I had no kind of expectations about Gideon the Ninth when I started reading it. I don't think I heard a lot about it on, you know, BookTube or anything, so yeah, I didn't really know what to expect. Of course, the popular tagline is, I believe, lesbian necromancers in space. So just from that, of course, you know, I was intrigued, I was interested, and then I just kind of picked it up on a whim, and I just loved it so much. That book was so funny and so interesting and so kind of like mysterious in a way, and of course like the sci-fi aspects, the fantasy stuff, the romance. It was like really fun, like enemies to friends to like rivals to lovers. Like, well, they weren't really lovers ever in that book, but yeah, just in general I absolutely love that book. So it did end on a pretty big cliffhanger, so I was really excited to pick the sequel up. This book, a lot of people say about this book that you're gonna be super confused, and I am here to tell you that they are correct, because you will be super confused. This book is one of the most confusing and like just weird books I've ever read, and if you've read Gideon the Ninth, you know like that book was kind of like confusing as well. So like this one's just a whole boatload more of confusing, but honestly I think it works with this book. I would say the confusing parts of this book that maybe you know, you're not really expecting is the fact that for majority of this book, about 2/3 of it, you're reading in second person. And so second person is when basically the author is saying you. So it'll be like you picked up, you know, the book or something. And so a lot of people don't like that. I personally, it's not that I don't like it. I do think it is kind of hard to read. But yeah, so majority of the book is in second person. So that was something that took a while to kind of get used to. And then again, because of that, I want to say, like, because of the fact that it was in second person, a lot of this book is just confusing because you don't really understand what is going on or why this is happening, and because the plot itself is like very different than how Gideon the Ninth was. Like Gideon the Ninth, we were solely in Gideon's perspective, and she of course is a very kind of funny and sassy character, so it was like, even if I was confused, I was like, this is just super fun to read. This book though is again in second person. It's more about Harrow, as the title suggests, and so there's not a lot of Gideon in this book, as a heads up. So I would say like the humor part of the book, it's like not the same level as Gideon. But all of that being said, once you get to the last kind of third or fourth of the book, for me at least, like it was all worth it. The payoff of this book and like everything that happened for majority of the book, all the confusion, all the wondering, all the questions you have really do pay off, because by the end of the book you're like, okay, it was all done for a reason and it all makes sense, and it all kind of sets up what is supposed to be the third book, Harrow the Ninth, in just such a perfect way, I want to say. And like I'm super excited to get to that third book. I think it's not coming out till like 2022, so maybe I should have spaced out reading the second one. But yeah, the way this book ends, like it's just the culmination of everything that has happened from Gideon the Ninth to everything in this book. I feel like it was really, really well done, and I have to say like huge kudos to Tamsin Muir, because a lot of people, and like myself included, I loved Gideon the Ninth, and it was done in such a special and unique way itself that when you get to this book you're like, wow, like she took a big risk in how she decided to write this book, and it could have gone really badly. But again, like personally, and I think a lot of other people have said this too, but like this book was great. I did give it 4.5 stars, I think only again because like it was a little bit of a chore getting into the writing style and the like second person perspective. But again, like even if like because of that it was like hard to read, the way it paid off in the end made me like I needed to give it a really good rating basically. So love this book and cannot wait for the third one. Then the next book I read was Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This book, I've heard so many great things. I've heard because it's like really unique, really diverse, and all of those things are very true, and I just absolutely love the book. I didn't necessarily have high expectations, but because I had heard a lot, like there was a bit of a hype about the book, but it definitely lived up to the hype for me. This book is basically, it's about this, a couple different characters, but it's about this young man who, when he's young, his mother kind of forces this prophecy on him and forces him to basically become a god and take on saving his people and their people. And so when he's young, this thing happens to him, and now that he's grown, he has to basically fulfill his kind of mission in life. He ends up meeting this girl named Yala, who is a very just a very fun character. She is a captain of a ship that is sent to take what was his name? Serapio was the other character's name. So she's basically tasked with taking him across this ocean to get him to where he needs to be, but she doesn't know what his end goal is. And they have this thing going on in the ship, and so like they're trying to get across the ocean. And then on the other side, there's where they're trying to go, there's basically these people who are I want to say like the political people of like this area or this country, and they are trying to kind of keep the peace that was taken away many years ago in this big kind of fight between them and the Crow people, who are the people that Serapio is kind of on their side. on a like bigger scale, this book is supposed to be an epic fantasy. It's a completely fantastical world, very unique and special characters. There's so much diversity in this book, which was something that I absolutely love. And I think my biggest surprise with the book was how much I love the characters. I love Serapio and I love Ziala. I love their like separate personalities. I love their storyline. I loved there was a bit of a romance, so I loved that. There were a couple other characters that I don't think I really connected with as much, but I thought their stories were really interesting. And I also did enjoy kind of the political side of the story and like what was going on with like how it was talking about these people in charge and like the specific character who I'm forgetting the name of, but kind of like her story and what she was like trying to do. Because another thing that was going on in the book was that because we got these different perspectives, we were kind of on the perspective of the good side and there was the bad side. But obviously when we're looking at the perspective of one character, they think they're good and that the other person's bad. And then when we're seeing the perspective of the other character who's supposedly bad for the other person, you know, they obviously think they're the good side. And so I really loved how we got these kind of two perspectives that were like on completely different sides, but we were able to kind of empathize and understand where both sides were coming from. And so I thought it was really like interesting to see the moral ambiguity of like these characters and their goals and their politics and how that kind of intersected when we kind of got to the end and what happened. This also ended on a really interesting cliffhanger, and I call it interesting because it felt pretty abrupt. And I think a lot of people also agree with that because a lot of things happened in this book and it was very, I want to say fast-paced, even though I don't know if it was fast-paced because I feel like I was completely hooked into the story, especially in the middle, but it wasn't necessarily that like a lot of things were happening. It was just felt like it was moving at a fast pace maybe. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain the reading experience, but basically when we get to the very end at like basically the climax of the story, it just kind of suddenly hits you and then the book ends. So I feel like because of that, it felt really abrupt. And I don't know, I feel like maybe I would have liked that a little maybe stretched out, but I also understand that it might have been done intentionally by the author so that we are you know, really waiting and anticipating the sequel, which I am, so I guess it worked. So the next book that I read was The Siren by Catherine St. John. So this was a new release that I kind of unexpectedly stumbled on, so I wasn't planning to read this. It wasn't in my TBR or anything, but honestly I think the cover is what hooked me because it just seemed like such a fun, interesting cover. And honestly I went into this book thinking it was a romance, and I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that it was actually a mystery thriller. And I thought it was such a fun and just exciting read. The basically what this book is about is it's like kind of set in Hollywood. It has to do with actors, which is actually something I really love in stories. So The Siren basically has three perspectives of these three women who are all on set of a Hollywood film. So one woman is the ex-husband of the star of the film, and she is kind of been off the radar for a while. She had like some kind of bad tabloid experiences, and so she was off the grid for a while before finally suddenly reappearing in this movie with her ex-husband. And so we follow her perspective. We're also following the perspective of her personal assistant, who actually has a bit of a dark past that we slowly uncover throughout the book. And then there's a third perspective of a character who is sort of, I think, like the producer of the film, and she has her own storyline kind of going on. So it was really fun. I just had such a fun time reading this book. I think I always find it really interesting when books kind of have Hollywood and like behind the scenes kind of stuff going on. I also think the author of this book is I believe she was an actress or like had worked in Hollywood, so I feel like it was pretty like genuine writing in terms of like what it was actually going on behind the scenes in like a Hollywood movie. But yeah, so the actual mystery of this book, I think it was so a bit expected. Like, I'm not gonna say I was like shocked or anything, but again, like it was just such a fun read. So if you're looking for like a bit of a mystery, but it's like a easy read, kind of fun and all of that, I would highly recommend this book. I just think the whole premise and the characters were just super fun to read about. So the next book that I read was Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco. So this was a book I was actually really looking forward to reading. I think mostly because of the premise. It had it felt like it was going to be like a really kind of dark romance with fantasy, and yeah, it just seemed like it was going to be really fun to read. When I read the book, however, it was not that fun. I did not like it. I did not have a good time reading it. Honestly, I feel like I was super bored throughout most of it, and yeah, the characters were not great. The writing wasn't great. Just overall, the book wasn't great. I gave this book 2 stars, and honestly, that might have been generous. I don't know. But basically, what this book is about is I believe it takes place in Italy, and it has to do with these kind of witches who have kind of been hiding amongst humans, and like they don't want people to know about their powers because they're dangerous and they have dangerous people who will be after them. And there's these 2 sisters, I believe they were twins, and then one of the sisters gets killed, and so the other sister is then set on this mission of finding out who killed her sister. And all her life she has been told not to kind of interact with or like allow these kind of demons to like ever get a hold of her, basically. And the demons are basically from the 7, what are they, 7 rings or whatever of hell, and so each, like there's 7 for each layer of hell or whatever, however it is. And so she ends up meeting one of the princes of hell, and with his help or not, we don't know. Well, I know because I read the book, but they either have to work together or you know, she needs his help to find out what happened to her sister. So yeah, based on that premise, I was like, this sounds really interesting, it sounds really fun, and it just wasn't. Like, honestly, I don't know what to say. It had so much potential, I feel, because of the plot and the characters. Like, there's so much you could have done. I don't know if it's maybe just because it was like too YA. But yeah, I just didn't like this. I also listened to it on audiobook, and I thought the audiobook was actually really good. I don't know if this is like other people have this as well, but I love when audiobooks kind of put in other sounds or music and like things like that, and like I feel like that really immerses you into the world of the book, because obviously when you're reading a book, you're just reading it in like your head with your own voice. So yeah, I did really like the audiobook, and I thought because of that I was gonna love the book, but it just didn't happen. So I was pretty disappointed by this book. So the next book that I read was Love from A to Z by S.K. Ali. This is such a good book. I love this so much. Straight up 5 stars. Like, this is such a sweet romance. It was such a great representation of a Muslim characters and Muslim life. Basically, this book is about a young girl who is a senior in high school, and her teacher is super racist and like outwardly discriminatory towards her and like Muslim people. He's an Islamophobe, and she basically kind of fights back and like says something or like does something which gets her suspended. So over spring break, her family sends her to Qatar, Doha, to spend time with her aunt and kind of get away and like calm herself down. On the plane ride to Doha, she meets a young man who is also Muslim, and they kind of start a little friendship, and then they meet each other again in Doha, and they connect, and like obviously the romance starts. And so what I loved about this book, of course, was the romance. I think the romance was really well done. It was really sweet. It was really just like, I want to say innocent, only because it was like, I don't think you read these kind of romances a lot in like books or even YA books. Like, it was just so sweet and like heartwarming, and I love the characters. I love the way like they met, and like how not everything was perfect with them. Like, they kind of had to work to connect and to meet and to like become friends and like, you know, the whole romance. So I love that aspect. But more than that, what I loved about this book is the representation. I've read I try to read like pretty diverse, and I've read a lot of books with Muslim representation as a Muslim myself, and I think this book is probably one of the best representations of like just what it means to be a Muslim in the Western world. Even though this book takes place in Doha, we are with characters who are from America or other parts of the world. And so I just loved how, even though we're dealing with like Islamophobia and racism and discrimination, like how the characters deal with it and just the relatability of like the things that were going on in the book. Not only like obviously like most minorities deal with some kind of racism or like stereotyping, things like that, but yeah, like for me this was just really relatable. I also love the fact that basically the like one main character is I believe she was half Pakistani and half Trinidadian, and then the other main character was, I believe, half white and half Chinese, and like both of them were Muslims. So it was a really great way to kind of show the diversity in like between Muslims themselves, as well as one of the characters and like different people in that family. Actually, a lot of characters were converts as well. So basically, they were like converted to Islam rather than being born into it, and I thought that was like started a great dialogue of you know, being Muslim and choosing Islam rather than like the what I feel is like just so overdone with media, of the fact of how like people like Muslims are forced into the religion and like have to rebel against it. You know, this book really kind of turned that on its head and was like, these like a lot of these characters chose Islam and like chose to follow these beliefs and this religion, and how that shaped them as people and like what their religion did for them like personally. So I just absolutely love that. And there were just so many cute, great moments. I also like tabbed this book a lot, so I definitely know that I loved it so much. And I really want to read, I believe SKLE has another book called Saints and Misfits, which actually has a sequel, I think, that recently came out. So I really want to read that. And yeah, I love reading like good Muslim representation, because honestly you don't see it a lot in books and movies and TV shows and, you know, so many things. So I love reading books like that. So now coming down to the last couple of books that I read this month, the second last, which was The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. This was a book that kind of hit me by surprise. I was absolutely not expecting to love this book as much as I did and to like feel so much as I read it. This was such a heartbreaking, such an emotional book. Just so many things about it that I just love so much, and honestly could be one of my like favorite books of the year. So basically this book is about takes place in Iran in I believe it starts in about the 1950s, and so it's about a young girl who is of the age of getting married, and she ends up kind of meeting this guy and falling in love with him, and like they really hit it off, they get engaged and they're supposed to get married, but there's like some family issues, and so his family doesn't really approve of her and like basically are pushing against the marriage and like don't want them to get married. And so what ends up happening, and like this book takes us through many years in these characters' lives. So it starts in the 1950s, and we also get scenes in like I think 2013, which is like their present day. And so we see kind of their like, especially the main character as well as these other characters' lives throughout the years, and how it's essentially a love story of two characters who were like meant to be, but due to like circumstances and family and like all these other things weren't able to be together. Honestly, this book was just so like a story about you know, what could have been and what should have been maybe. It also, which was like a really, I think, great part of the book too, was it took place in Iran mostly, and it really showed the culture and the political issues, especially in like the 1950s, 1960s, maybe even 1970s, of like what was going on in Iran. And I personally didn't really know a lot about like the country's history and the politics of the country, but it was really interesting to read and like be immersed in this culture and learn about the history through like reading this book. But yeah, honestly, like I don't know if I'm making any sense because I just really love this book, and I fell in love with like the story and the characters and the romance, which was like so heartbreaking again, because like all you want is for them to like find each other and to be together, but like also understanding the different circumstances and the things that were like keeping them away from each other, and how kind of inevitable it was that they weren't going to be together because of all those circumstances. So yeah, this was just so good. I really highly recommend this to everyone. I have honestly been talking nonstop about this book to like anyone who will listen, so I really loved it. And then the last book, which I actually finished on exactly May 31st, is Cersei by Madeline Miller. This book is one that was like sitting on my shelf for a long time, and honestly this cover is what ultimately made me pick it up this month. I absolutely love Greek mythology. I fell in love with it, obviously, as many other people, because of Percy Jackson, as well as I've like taken a lot of courses in university about Greek mythology and about Greek myths and all of that. So I love reading kind of retellings and like stories that have to do with Greek mythology. So this, of course, is by the great Madeline Miller, who wrote The Song of Achilles, which I haven't read, but I know is super emotional and sad and everybody cries with it. This book, it definitely wasn't as I guess hard-hitting as I know a lot of people say The Song of Achilles was, but it was so beautiful. Like Madeline Miller's writing is exquisite. It's so beautiful, it's so kind of lyrical, and it makes you feel so many things, which I loved. I also love the fact that like the book is obviously about Cersei, who, if you know anything about the Greek myths, is a character in the Odyssey by Homer, and she honestly doesn't have a huge like role in the Odyssey. She's just this kind of villain that turns men and like Odyssey and his crew into pigs, and you know, is ultimately defeated in the end. There's kind of different tellings of like what actually happens in the actual myths, but I love the fact that Madeline Miller took this character, who honestly is a really small role in this overarching Greek myth, and really gave her a voice, and we see her perspective, and we see kind of the build-up, I want to say, of like how she came to be who she was when we see her in the Odyssey. Cersei is, we know her as just this villain, but in this book we see her as basically a person, and we see her with her faults and with her kind of circumstances, but also with her like her love and her heart and her warmth and like all the other aspects of her. It just took me a second to like fall in love with like what I was reading, but honestly once I got to maybe like past the first third of this book, I really couldn't put it down. It was yeah, just heartbreaking and beautiful and so good. So like I said, it has been such a great month of reading. I feel like I didn't read as many books as like I have in the past months, but every book that I read, other than a couple, was just so good. I like so many different books that I love for different reasons, and I fell in love with like the world and the characters, and yeah, I'm really happy, and I really want to do this more of like not just reading to read, but rather reading like books that I think I will actually enjoy and like have a good time reading. So I feel like I've been trying to like pick books that I know I'm gonna like more, which obviously ends up making me, you know, like them and give them good ratings and all of that stuff. So yeah, it was such a great month reading. Thank you guys for watching this video. See you guys next time.